Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Zeynep Gökçe. The latest nuclear talks between the US and Iran have hit yet another deadlock. Tehran is demanding full sanctions relief in return for scaling back its program, while Washington insists on tough restrictions to block any path towards a bomb. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Iran must import enriched uranium, not produce it. But is that a condition Tehran is willing to accept? President Trump has issued a clear warning: agree to a deal or face military consequences. Iran, under growing pressure, is strengthening ties with Russia and China. Meanwhile, Israel says any deal that leaves Iran's nuclear infrastructure intact is a non-starter. Prime Minister Netanyahu is demanding full dismantlement. With no side showing signs of compromise, the question now is, can diplomacy survive this standoff? For more on unpacking multi-layered diplomacy shaping Iran's nuclear future, joining me now from Melbourne, Australia is Shahram Akbarzadeh, a research professor at Deakin University. From Kuala Lumpur, Julia Rocknefard, a senior lecturer at Taylor's University, and from Utrecht, Netherlands, Susie Snyder, a program coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Shahram, how much have the talks progressed so far, and where do you see the negotiations heading?
Well, wonderful to be here. I think that the talks have progressed quite significantly. There have been 3 rounds of conversations, and also we have had a commencement of technical negotiations. So that suggests to me that both parties have agreed on basic framework for the negotiation, for the agreement, and have entered into detailed, more granular discussions. Of course, the risk is that things can fall apart at the granular level as the United States and Iran draw red lines around what is allowed and not allowed.
Yes, and as these nuclear talks were underway, there's been a deadly port blast in Iran. There's been cyber attacks on its gas stations. The past months have seen US increase its attacks on the Houthis. The fall of Assad, Iran has lost an ally in the region. Julia, in this setting, do you see Iran giving in to US demands?
It's true that there is a big discussion about how weakened Iran is at the moment. So probably that's a very good time. The timing is just try to twist Iran's hand. However, when it comes to the nuclear talks, Iran specifically mentioned that it plans to focus solely on the nuclear issue, not touch on any other matters in the region. So while there might be some acknowledgement in Tehran that it has been weakened with everything that has been going on in terms of its influence in the region, we can't say that it either gave up an ambition for this sort of influence and the further expansion probably in the future, nor can we say that these regional influence networks, they serve very much of a purpose in these current negotiations. So I think it would try to focus solely, as I said, on the nuclear issue. And I don't think there is a large possibility that Iran's hand will be twisted just because Hezbollah is weakened, just because there are strikes administered against the Houthis in Yemen, or because there were very unfortunate events happening in Iran itself, although in the explosions in Isfahan and in the port city of Bandar Abbas as well. But there is no reason to believe that these are an acts of sabotage. So I think what Iran is trying to do is to stand strong against the pressure rendered by Donald Trump. So it's trying to sort of test the water of how much it can succeed in the diplomacy if it pushes back against this maximum pressure on the part of Donald Trump.
Yes, so Shahram mentioned there's been a few rounds of talks, and it's come to the point to the technical talks. Susie, could you give us some details, like in the way that what do you think these talks encompassed, and what are the sticking points?
Well, thank you. I think there's three main areas where things might get tricky. And what we've seen is that would be to what level and what percentage of enrichment capability will Iran be allowed to progress its nuclear program? That will tie in very closely to how it advances its nuclear energy, nuclear medicine, other radiological programs in the country. And so enrichment capability is necessary for the production of nuclear weapons, but there is also enrichment capability necessary for some types of nuclear energy production. And finally, I think the thing that will be most contentious is how the talks relate to missile development and missile capacity. Because one thing is developing a nuclear explosive device or a nuclear warhead, and that is in the process of being stopped, we hope. But the other part is how you deliver that device to a target. And that is an integral part of a nuclear weapon. So how missiles are discussed in this set of negotiations, this round of negotiations, is going to be a key sticking area. And I think what we need to remember is, while it's great and we're very hopeful that there is a broad framework, with any sort of diplomatic engagement, nothing is final until everything is final.
Yes, and Trump's advisors seem to be divided over how to proceed, because there's one voice saying that there should be a total dismantlement of Iran's nuclear program. The other is saying maybe they could allow it to enrich uranium at low levels. Shahram, what do you think about these conflicting voices? Does the US really want a deal?
Well, I think, yes, fundamentally, President Trump wants to have a deal. He prefers a deal to war. And that is why, that's exactly why the Iranian authorities have also started the negotiation, because they also want to have a deal and not engage in conflict and confrontation. But there are the conflicting messages coming from the US is a serious problem, because, as you mentioned, Marco Rubio has been talking about Iran not having capacity to enrich uranium full stop, and importing their enriched uranium for civilian use. Well, that's the red line for the Iranian authorities. For Iran, it is their sovereign right to have capacity to enrich uranium. So it's not a question of whether it should be 3.67 or 60% enrichment. It's a fundamental right as they see it. So that is a red line for the Iranian authorities. There's also a red line in terms of missile technology that Susie mentioned. Iranians don't want to be negotiating any other concern or any other issue apart from the nuclear program. And that means they're not going to discuss relations with proxies. They're not going to discuss their missile program or the drone program. Those topics are off limits. So these are challenges that that the U.S. negotiation will have to handle.
Yeah, so both Shahram and Julia are saying that they want to separate those issues with the nuclear talks. And Julia, earlier you said that it doesn't seem like a sabotage when we were talking about the port blast, but Iran is accusing Israel and has said that it's undermining the process. So how much influence does Israel have over US's negotiating strategy? And what is there any version of deal that would be acceptable for Israel?
Well, indeed, this proverbial Israeli lobby in the US politics, it didn't go anywhere. So Iran always sees the hand of the Israeli lobby behind, and Benjamin Netanyahu himself, the Prime Minister of Israel, behind the pressure or the attempts to lobby at a particular scenario in how the United States are going to deal with Iran. There is a version of the deal that is probably acceptable to Israel, and that is the so-called the Libyan scenario where, as you said earlier, the Iran nuclear program gets dismantled altogether. And as Shahram also just mentioned, that there is going to be a red line that Iran won't be ready to cross, and that concerns uranium enrichment taken out of the country altogether. And then a step further, if we go for the Libyan model, the centrifuges are also not supposed to be based in the country. So the full dismantlement of the nuclear program, which is the reddest line for Iran, of course, it's not going to cross it because it needs a leverage for its future relationship, its future talks with any other power. So I think what is going to happen, where we are slowly moving towards, is probably some sort of an interim deal, which Israel is not going to be happy anyway with. But the Trump administration will have to come to terms with something like that. And Israel already stated, and it's been reported in the media, that it's preparing with all its military capacity to take on Iran, or the threat that is coming from Iran. So I'm sure it's not going to be happy with any possible outcome of the negotiations that we are projecting now. Because for Israel, it would be great now to deal with Iran once and for good, how it happened with Syria, more or less, and it keeps finishing up the job. It probably would love to deal with Yemeni Houthis, once and for good. And then Iran would be, and its groups of influence would be the next reasonable step to eliminate as a threat that Israel sees to itself. And of course, no nuclear program should be on the table.
Yes, Israel is quite threatened by Iran's nuclear program. But Susie, when it comes to nuclear weapons, is Israel the real threat for the region or the world, or is it Iran?
Well, I don't think we can look at this as one or the other.
Okay.
Israel has nuclear weapons, and those nuclear weapons pose a threat to Israel as well as to the region. They cannot be used in a way that does not harm Israelis. And I think it's really important to remember that any country that has nuclear weapons, the most likely to suffer from the use of nuclear weapons are their own citizens. That is what underpins the deterrence theory. So you have to accept a certain sacrifice of your own citizenry. So Israel's nuclear weapons are a threat to Israel. They are a threat to the region. Any country's nuclear weapons are a threat. And that is why most nations in the world have now joined the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Not only have they rejected the weapons for them, the development of the weapons for themselves, but they're calling on every state to reject those weapons thoroughly and through a legally binding effort, and to eliminate those arsenals in a way that is verifiable and comprehensive. And that is a step that will provide safety for all of the individuals, the humans, the people living in the region, because any nuclear weapons introduced into this region are problematic. And Israel's nuclear weapons are a threat, but so would any nuclear weapons developed by Iran. There are no safe nuclear weapons.
Right. So I want to move on to Iranians, how they feel about this deal. We know years of sanctions have crippled Iran's economy. And Shahram, how much has Iran's domestic politics shaped its negotiation stance?
Well, I think you have to acknowledge that the Iranian system is very much based on an authoritarian rule of the supreme leader and the clergy. And it is that it's their decision to enter or not enter negotiation on the nuclear program. We have reached this point because the leadership in Iran feels that it is facing an existential threat, given the economic downturn, given the changing regional dynamics that you mentioned earlier, with Assad falling, with Hezbollah on the back foot. And also with President Trump's gunboat diplomacy and constant attacks on Houthis. So the Iranian regime feels that it is at a very difficult juncture in its history and feels it's important to break out of this isolation, change the dynamic by entering into an agreement to remove sanctions on the Iranian economy, because that's the only way they can really regain some level of legitimacy in the country. At the moment, the regime has zero legitimacy. Well, that's an exaggeration because something like 20 or 30% did support the regime, but there is a serious cross of legitimacy in Iran. So that is really pushing, that's a really pushing factor for negotiations. And that's why we see talks proceed.
What about the Iranian people, like the local media? What are the reactions about this deal?
There are differing diverse voices. Predominantly, the population wishes the Iranian economy to recover, jobs to appear, and the Iranian currency to regain its standing. That's the primary concern for Iranian population. But you also have hardliners who oppose talks with the United States. But they are tempered by the decision of the supreme leader. So everyone needs to be quiet and listen to the supreme leader.
Okay, Julia, if a deal is reached, how would that affect the regional security and stability?
Well, if we go for this imaginary kind of scenario, because I don't really believe as of this moment that some kind of permanent deal can be reached, only an interim one. So if there were to be a permanent deal, then of course we would love to see the region as a more stable and secure place, where even though there would be still rivalries between the major actors, let's say Saudi Arabia, Iran, or Turkey, nevertheless it would be there would be more agreement over the major things, and that is how to maintain stability and security. However, as we already spoke, the deal, if it is to materialize, it is going to be solely dedicated to the nuclear issues and nothing else. So it doesn't take away the premises on which Iran is built, the current political system of the Islamic Republic of Iran is built, and it doesn't take away the same ideological orientation from the groups that act in support of Iran. And among those are its anti-Israeli stance, its anti-American stance. And even if we could do something about this anti-American stance in the course of these negotiations, the anti-Israeli stance proved to be valuable for using both for the domestic political audience, even though, again, recently, in the recent years, the attitude towards this has changed. And most importantly, it's in its foreign policy. So I don't see Tehran giving that up. And that means perpetuation of tensions between Iran and Israel and actors that might be willing to accept and embrace the Abraham Accords. So the deal on the nuclear issue, without addressing all the other issues, it is not going to do much to this reconfiguration in the region. That's my take.
Right. So, Susie, if a deal is reached and it was to permit Iran some level of uranium enrichment, can we expect other regional powers to roll out their own nuclear programs?
Well, we already are seeing others in the region rolling out nuclear programs and engaging in the process to acquire nuclear technology for nuclear energy reactors. We're seeing negotiations between the United States and Saudi Arabia on the provision of reactors and reactor technology. We're seeing increased discussions with the International Atomic Energy Agency around new protocols or additional protocols to make sure that all technology is kept out of military systems, but there's a furtherance of exploration within the region for more nuclear technology, something that has been promoted a lot in the context of new energy, a new energy drive. And I think we will continue to see that quite a bit. It's something that states have a right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to acquire nuclear technology as long as it is kept out of military programs, and they negotiate with the International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure that. And we've seen a major rise in the number of agreements with the agency when it comes to both the comprehensive safeguards agreements and additional protocols. So I think we will see more within the region. The thing that we have to be conscientious of, though, all the time is making sure that the materials do not get diverted into nuclear programs, which is why any state that does engage and does look to bring about or enter into new nuclear technology arrangements needs to have, at the bare minimum, an additional protocol with the IAEA.
Yes, I want to move on to China at this point. Iran has said it's been briefing China about these latest talks. Shahram, how critical is China's support for Iran when it comes to these negotiations?
Well, China obviously favors these negotiations and is hopeful that talks will succeed in resolving the blockade, the international economic sanctions on Iran, because China has major economic interests in Iran and is a major investor in Iranian infrastructure. So China would be very positive towards an end of international sanctions. And this also feeds into China's plans as a major regional power in the Middle East. You might recall that China mediated the end of a diplomatic dispute between Iran and Saudi Arabia in 2023 and ended the diplomatic breakdown. So China is growing its influence in the region more and more. And Iran, and both Saudi Arabia and Iran are major trading partners for China. So all of this, of course, will be benefiting Iran and the international community, but will also benefit China.
Yes, and at this point, I want to talk about Russia too, because we're running out of time. So, Julia, recently the Russian president hosted the Sultan of Oman. What role is Russia playing behind the scenes when it comes to these nuclear talks?
Well, Russia, indeed, they've discussed on this meeting with the Sultan of Oman, although we only have brief statements from the media that they are satisfied with how the talks are ongoing, and Russia is very happy with Oman's contribution of a small power into such a significant matter, small but powerful. Russia has consistently been a party to these talks. It has been always present, has always advocated for Iran not acquiring nuclear weapons, because it has seen itself stably as a champion in the non-proliferation process. And the contribution into these talks are very important to Russia. The expansion of its ties with Iran that we've recently seen, including the signing of this 20-year agreement on strategic partnership, also sort of reinforces the perception in Iran that Russia has got its back, but there are limits to it as well, including the widely discussed issue of how much support Russia would actually render to Iran in the case of a military escalation, in the case of it being attacked by either Israel or the United States. And this agreement on strategic partnership does not include any provision on the defense pact. In other words, probably there could be some provision of help behind the scenes, but there's nothing that of sorts that Russia committed to.
Yes, all right. Shahram, Julia, Susie, Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Zeynep Gökçe. If you've got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find more exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.